The assassin's blade was already in the air when Sergeant Damon Cole stepped through the wrong door. He hadn't meant to enter the Cathedral of Vale Soren. His orders were simple: secure the perimeter of the Galactic Accord Summit, patrol the Eastern Corridor, report anything unusual. The door marked with 3 silver moons hadn't been on his map. The guard who should have been standing beside it was face down on the polished obsidian floor, a thin needle buried in the back of his neck. Damon's training took over before his mind caught up. He threw himself sideways, caught the wrist of the figure in dark ceremonial robes, twisted hard, and heard the blade clatter against the floor. The assassin was fast, faster than a human, with 4 arms and reflexes like a coiled spring. But Damon had spent 11 years in special operations, and he trained against species with twice the limbs and 3 times the speed. He had the figure pinned in 4 seconds. Silence swallowed the room. Damon looked up from the floor and registered, for the first time, that he was not in a corridor. He was standing in the most sacred chamber of the Vale Soren Empire. The wedding hall stretched 100 meters in every direction, its ceiling open to the twin suns through sheets of crystalline glass. Hundreds of alien dignitaries in ceremonial dress stood frozen, their faces ranging from shock to fury. Luminescent petals hung suspended in the air by anti-gravity filaments, unmoving now, as if the whole room had inhaled and forgotten to breathe. At the end of the central aisle, elevated on a stepped dais of white stone, stood the Queen of the Vale Soren Empire, Queen Soraya. Damon had seen her image in the mission briefings. Everyone attending the summit had. She was tall, silver-skinned, with eyes the deep amber of a dying star. She wore a crown of living vines that flowered in real time, and her wedding gown was woven from the light of captured nebulae, or so the cultural briefing had claimed. Standing beside her was her intended, a Vale prince from the Second Colony system, his expression now something beyond outrage. Beneath Damon's knee, the assassin stopped struggling. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Damon's earpiece crackled. His commander's voice came through in a tight, controlled whisper. "Cole, tell me you are not inside the royal chamber." He didn't answer. The Queen's gaze moved slowly across the room and settled on him. Not with fear. Not with fury. With something else entirely, something that felt almost like calculation. One of the royal guards broke from the perimeter. He was enormous, taller than any Vale soldier Damon had encountered, in armor of black jade and gold, moving with the unhurried precision of someone who had never needed to rush because nothing had ever escaped him. He stopped 10 feet from Damon, one hand on the ceremonial spear at his side, and looked down at the figure pinned to the floor. The assassin's hood had fallen back. The royal guard's face showed nothing, but his hand released the spear. Damon didn't understand that reaction until he followed the guard's gaze and recognized what was beneath the assassin's ceremonial robes. A secondary rank insignia, the emblem of the prince's household guard. The intended groom's own people had sent someone to kill the queen at her wedding. The silence in the room shifted from shock to something darker, more dangerous. Several of the prince's delegation began moving toward the aisle, and Damon recognized that movement. Not retreat, repositioning. He'd seen it in a dozen conflict zones on a dozen worlds. People getting ready to finish what the assassin had started. He pulled the assassin upright and stepped forward toward the dais, keeping the figure between himself and the delegation like a shield. Not aggressive. Controlled. Every step deliberate, every angle calculated to give the royal guard a clean line of sight while minimizing exposure to the queen. The head of the royal guard watched him move and did not intervene. That itself was a statement. Damon reached the base of the dais and stopped. He pressed the assassin to his knees on the white stone steps, then stepped back and stood at attention. Military attention. hands open, spine straight, eyes forward. He was not making a threat. He was making a report. He looked directly at the Queen and said the only words that felt right in that moment, the words they drilled into soldiers before any diplomatic mission. Threat neutralized. Ma'am. A child's voice broke the silence. Small, clear, and completely fearless from somewhere in the gathered crowd. He saved her. Why is everyone still scared of him? That single question detonated through the chamber like a depth charge. And, in the pause that followed, the Queen took one step down from the dais, and the whole world changed. The child who had spoken was no more than 6 years old, standing in the third row with her hand still raised, as if she'd asked a question in a schoolroom. Her guardian, an elderly veiled woman in ceremonial silver, tried to pull her back into the crowd. The girl didn't move. Her name, Damon would learn later, was Lygia. She was the youngest daughter of one of the Empire's elder council members. She had never been taught to be afraid of humans, because her father believed that fear without experience was just ignorance wearing armor. She would become important. But not yet. Right now, the prince was speaking. His name was Kalen, second heir of the Soren Outer Colonies, and he had the voice of someone who had only ever been argued with by people who wanted something from him. It carried across the chamber like he was already certain of the outcome. The human violated sacred ground. Regardless of circumstance, protocol demands his removal and detention. He didn't look at the assassin still kneeling on the dais steps. He didn't look at the Queen. He looked at his own delegation, and that told Damon everything. The Queen had not spoken yet. That was also telling. The head of the royal guard had not moved. His name was Sobel, though Damon didn't know that yet either. He stood 7 feet tall, with the stillness of someone who had survived 80 years of court politics by understanding that the most dangerous moment in any crisis was the silence before someone powerful made a decision they couldn't take back. Sobel had seen the insignia on the assassin's robes. He had identified it in the first second. He had said nothing, moved nowhere, and waited. Because Sobel understood something that the prince and most of the delegation did not. The human soldier's presence in this room had already changed the shape of everything. The question was how. Kalen was still speaking. His tone had shifted from outrage to the soft, practiced cadence of someone laying groundwork for an ultimatum. He spoke about the sanctity of veil tradition, about the gravity of protocol violations, about the embarrassment to both their peoples. He was building towards something, and every word was a brick in a wall he intended to trap the Queen behind. Damon stood at attention and said nothing. He had been trained for exactly this, high-tension diplomatic environments, where a single wrong movement could ignite an interstellar incident. His job right now was to be a fixed point, to not escalate, to let the room read him correctly. The Queen descended the second step. Kalen's voice paused, just briefly, then continued. She descended the third. He stopped talking. Queen Soraya walked down the remaining steps of the dais slowly, her gown trailing light across the white stone, her crown of living vines still flowering. She walked past Damon without looking at him. She walked to the assassin, who was still on his knees, and she looked at him for a long moment. Then she crouched, which was extraordinary, because queens of the Vale Soren did not crouch, did not lower themselves, not in ceremony, not in public, not for any reason that wasn't war or grief. She looked at the insignia on his robes. She stood. She turned to face Prince Kalen. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the child Lygia had gone still. "You sent him," the Queen said. Not a question. Kalen's face did something complicated. The architecture of his prepared arguments crumbled in real time. He had clearly not expected her to identify the insignia herself, or perhaps he had not expected her to say it out loud in front of 500 witnesses. The human violated, you sent him, she said again. The second repetition was not for clarification. It was a wall going up around a verdict. Two of the royal guard moved, silently and, without command, to positions flanking the prince's delegation. The delegation didn't run. Running would have been an admission. But they stopped repositioning, stopped their quiet drift toward the aisle, and became very still. Sobel finally moved. He walked to the center of the chamber, planted his spear once against the floor with a sound like a gunshot, and spoke in the formal court register that Damon's translation implant rendered as something between a legal judgment and a declaration of war. The Accord of Aelsorin forbids the taking of royal life during the ceremony of binding. The penalty is dissolution of all treaties, exile from imperial territory, and forfeiture of all colonial rights negotiated under the Kaelin name. Kaelin went the color of ash. The little girl, Lygia, raised her hand again. Does that mean the wedding is cancelled? Her guardian hissed at her to be quiet. But the question landed differently this time, because in the wake of it, the queen almost smiled. It was small, restrained, the kind of almost smile that carries the weight of a decision already made. She turned back to Damon. He was still at attention. He had not moved since planting himself at the base of the dais. His rifle was still slung across his back, safety engaged. His face was professionally neutral. He was a sergeant from the 14th Human Expeditionary Force, 34 years old, from a city on the coast of a planet called Earth that most Vale couldn't pronounce. He was also, at this precise moment, the only person in this chamber who had acted without calculation. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "No, ma'am. You should be." "Probably," he said. "But you were in danger." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the room began to feel the weight of it. Long enough that Kaelin's lawyers, somewhere in the delegation, began quietly reassessing their contracts. "What is your name, soldier?" "Sergeant Damon Cole. Human Expeditionary Force." "Sergeant Cole," she said. "You will stay." It was not a request. The next 3 hours were a controlled demolition of everything Prince Kaelin had spent 4 years building. The dissolution proceedings began before the wedding guests had fully left the chamber. Sobel coordinated the prince's detention with the same quiet efficiency he applied to everything: 2 guards, a formal hold, no spectacle. Kaelin's delegation was separated and escorted to holding suites that were comfortable by military standards and completely surveillance-saturated. No charges were formally announced. None needed to be. The insignia had spoken. Damon was placed in a side chamber with a water source, a chair that was too tall for human proportions, and Sobel himself standing in the doorway. They didn't speak for 11 minutes. Then, Sobel said, in flawless translated standard, "You understood that standing your ground was the correct response." "I understood that moving would make things worse," Damon said. "That is the same thing." Damon looked at the Royal Guard commander and recalibrated. This was not a man, an entity, making small talk. This was an assessment. "You identified the insignia when I pinned him," Damon said. Sobel inclined his head slightly. "You didn't act on it immediately. I needed to understand the soldier before I understood the situation," Sobel said. "A soldier who enters this chamber by accident and neutralizes a threat without killing is a different variable than a soldier who enters this chamber by design. And you are the former." A pause. "It is fortunate." Damon's commander had been trying to reach him through the earpiece for the better part of an hour. He'd sent one brief reply: "Situation contained. Stand by." He suspected the diplomatic fallout from a human soldier disrupting a royal Vale wedding, even by saving the queen, was already generating frantic messages across 3-star systems. His career was almost certainly over. He found, to his own surprise, that this didn't particularly concern him. What concerned him was the little girl. Ligia had been permitted to stay during the initial proceedings, which was unusual because she was a child and this was a crisis. Her father, Elder Councilman Varric, had arrived within the first hour and had tried to remove her. She had told him, with complete composure, that she wanted to watch because she was going to be on the council someday and she needed to understand how things got fixed. Varric had looked at his daughter for a long moment, then taken a seat beside her. Damon had caught the exchange from across the room and filed it away. The child was a signal. In his experience, children who spoke without calculation in high-stakes rooms either had extraordinary parents or extraordinary instincts. Ligia appeared to have both. The queen returned to the chamber at the 4-hour mark. She had changed from the wedding gown into formal court attire, which was heavier, darker, all structured lines and institutional authority. Her crown had been replaced with one of solid silver. The transformation was intentional. She was no longer a bride. She was a monarch addressing a crisis. She sat in the central chair of the council table, and her senior advisors arranged themselves around her. Damon was invited to sit, which surprised him. He sat. "Sergeant Cole," the Queen said, "the Galactic Accord Summit proceeds tomorrow. Your government will require an explanation for your presence in this chamber and your role in this situation." "Yes, ma'am. We will provide one." She looked at him directly. "The official record will state that a member of the Human Security Detail discovered an assassination plot and acted to prevent it at personal risk, in full accordance with the protective mandate of the Accord." "That's accurate," Damon said. "It is." A pause. "It is also insufficient." He waited. "The Veilsoran Empire has no mechanism," she said, "for expressing gratitude proportional to the preservation of a sovereign life. Our protocols cover alliance, trade, military cooperation. They do not cover this." She looked at her advisors briefly, then back at him. "We are going to create one." The advisors exchanged glances. Soval's expression didn't change. Ligia, seated against the far wall beside her father, leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Damon had a feeling, the particular feeling of a man standing at the edge of something enormous, looking down, that the next sentence was going to rearrange the rest of his life. "You will attend a formal ceremony tomorrow morning," the Queen said, "before the summit convenes. Soval will brief you on the required protocol. You will need to stand still, which I understand you are capable of, and you will need to accept what is offered, which may be more difficult." "What's being offered?" Damon asked. She almost smiled again. "We'll discuss that when the chamber is less crowded," she said. Soval briefed him at dawn. They stood on a high balcony overlooking the city of Veilsoran Prime, its towers catching the first light of the twin suns, the streets below already filling with citizens who had heard, through whatever means news traveled in this empire, that something significant had happened at the royal wedding. Not the assassination attempt. The other thing. The human soldier. Soval explained the ceremony with the economy of someone who understood that context mattered more than detail. The Veilsoran crown had two components. The one worn by the reigning monarch was fixed, inherited, unassignable. But the empire had, in its ancient founding documents, a secondary provision, a consort crown, historically given to the partner of the ruling queen, carrying no legislative power but absolute diplomatic standing. It had been used twice in the empire's 4,000-year history. Once for a beloved prince from a distant system. Once for the queen's own grandmother, who had ruled alongside her king as his equal long before the laws caught up to the practice. The secondary crown, when formally bestowed, granted the recipient the title of King Consort of the Veilsoran Empire. Not a ruler. Not a husband. Something older and, stranger, a protected equal, a sovereign shield. The title carried with it the right to speak in any council, in any system that recognized the Empire's authority, with the full weight of the crown behind the words. In practical terms, Sobel explained, it meant that Sergeant Damon Cole would become the highest-ranked human being in the history of interstellar diplomacy. Not because of politics. Not because of negotiation. Because a queen had chosen to answer a debt with the only currency proportional to its weight. "She is not proposing marriage," Sobel clarified, reading whatever was happening on Damon's face. "She is proposing elevation. It is not personal. It is structural. Does it matter if I say no?" Sobel considered this. "You can decline. She will not compel you. But you should understand that the gesture, when made publicly, carries its own significance. The Empire will see what she offers. They will also see your answer." Damon looked at the city below. He thought about his commander, who was certainly furious. He thought about the Accord summit beginning in 6 hours, and the 15 systems that had sent representatives, and the years of diplomatic architecture that had built toward this moment. He thought about Kalen, in his comfortable surveillance suite, and the assassination attempt that had nearly worked. He thought about Lygia asking, "Does that mean the wedding is canceled?" And the Queen almost smiling. "What does she get out of it?" he asked. "A signal," Sobel said. "The Empire lost a marriage alliance today. In its place, she is proposing a different kind of alliance. One that tells every system watching that the Veilsoran crown stands with humanity. Not because of trade. Not because of treaties." He paused. Because a human soldier stood between a queen and a blade without being asked. Damon was quiet for a long time. "Walk me through the protocol," he said finally. The ceremony was held in the same chamber as the failed wedding. Someone had cleared the assassin's blood from the white stone steps and replaced the crushed petals with fresh ones. The crystalline ceiling let in the full light of the twin suns. It was, by any measure, more beautiful in the morning than it had been the evening before. The delegations attending the Accord summit had been invited to observe. All 15 of them came. Whatever they had expected from this morning, it was clearly not this. Damon stood at the base of the dais in his dress uniform. Human Expeditionary Force blue, service ribbons across the chest, boots polished to a mirror finish. He had refused the veil ceremonial robes they'd offered him. Sobel had accepted that refusal without comment. He was here as what he was. That was the point. Sobel stood to his left. Lygia and her father were in the front row. The Queen descended the dais steps. She moved differently than she had the night before. Not the careful, weighted steps of a bride managing a gown and a moment and an audience. These were sovereign steps, unhurried and absolute, the walk of someone who had already made every calculation and arrived at certainty. She carried the secondary crown in both hands. It was smaller than he'd expected. Silver-white metal and a single dark stone at the center that caught the light of the twin suns and threw it back as something deeper and older than reflection. It had been in the Empire's vault for 300 years. No one had thought it would ever leave. She stopped in front of him. The chamber was completely silent. He met her eyes. Amber, like a dying star. Clear and steady and carrying the weight of 4,000 years of empire. "Sergeant Damon Cole," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "The Veilsoran Empire has no tradition of owing debts to outsiders. We have trade agreements, military alliances, territorial pacts. We have never had the language for what you did last night." She paused. "We are building it now." She raised the crown. "You entered our most sacred space without permission, without agenda, and without hesitation. You stood between a sovereign and death, and then you stood still while the world decided what to do with you. You did not demand recognition. You did not leverage the moment. You simply reported, as soldiers do, that the threat was neutralized. Her voice was steady and precise and completely without performance. The Empire recognizes this. The Empire responds. Damon felt the crown settle on his head. It was lighter than it looked. The metal was warm, as if it had been waiting. King Consort of the Vale Soren Empire, she said. Protector of the crown. First of your kind to carry this title. You will speak in our councils with our full authority. You will be heard in every system that recognizes our sovereignty. You will carry this weight not as a symbol, but as a function, because the Empire needs someone who acts before the politics arrive. She stepped back. She looked at him. And then, Queen Soraya of the Vale Soren Empire, sovereign of 14 systems, ruler of the oldest continuous monarchy in the known galaxy, did something no reigning queen had done in 1,000 years of recorded ceremony. She bowed. It was brief. It was precise. It was absolute. The chamber held its breath. Lygia, in the front row, started clapping. She was 6 years old, and she didn't know you weren't supposed to. Her father made no move to stop her. Within 3 seconds the entire chamber had joined her, not because protocol demanded it, but because it was the only response left. Damon stood on the white stone steps in his human expeditionary force dress uniform, wearing a crown that was older than his civilization's spaceflight, in a room full of alien dignitaries who would spend the next decade trying to understand what they had witnessed, and he thought about what Sobel had said on the balcony at dawn. She is proposing elevation. It is not personal. It is structural. He understood now that those two things were not as different as Sobel had intended. His earpiece crackled. His commander's voice, tightly controlled and carefully professional, said, Cole, please tell me you understand what just happened. Damon looked at the queen, who had turned to face her empire, standing at the top of the dais in the full light of the twin suns, the crown of living vines still flowering against her silver skin. Yes, sir, he said quietly. I think I finally do. The twin suns climbed higher. The petals began to move again, drifting on invisible air, suspended and unhurried, as if the room had finally, after a very long night, remembered how to breathe.